She was a drifter with scar on her face until a cowboy loved her, unaware she owned half the state. What if the scarred drifter he saved wasn't just escaping a brutal past, but was secretly heir to half the state? Prepare for a shocking twist as her true identity ignites a dangerous confrontation, changing their lives forever. Eager to find out what happens? Subscribe, hit that like button, and listen to the full story now. The scream tore from her throat, swallowed by the vast, uncaring expanse of the Nevada desert night. She stumbled, a sharp rock gouging her already raw palm as she fell, the impact jarring through her exhausted frame. Her breath came in ragged, burning gasps, each one a fresh wave of panic. Behind her, the guttural roar of an engine, too close, its headlights momentarily silhouetting the skeletal arms of a Joshua tree, painting her fleeting shadow long and distorted on the sand. They were still coming. Her fingers, slick with a mixture of sweat and something warm and sticky she dared not identify, fumbled with the strap of the worn satchel slung across her body. It held everything and nothing: a few dollars, a faded photograph, and the damning evidence that had turned her life into this relentless chase. The scar on her left cheek throbbed, a constant, fiery reminder of the moment her old life had shattered, the moment she became a ghost. Another shot rang out, closer this time, the crack echoing off the distant, indifferent mountains. It wasn't aimed to kill, not yet. It was a game to them, a terrifying, drawn-out torment. She pushed herself up, legs trembling, the taste of dust and blood coiling in her mouth. There was nowhere to hide, only the endless, star-dusted darkness and the gnawing certainty that each frantic step was leading her further into an unwinnable oblivion. The headlights swept across the landscape again, pinning her like an insect. She veered sharply, a sob escaping her lips, a desperate animal sound. How much longer could she run? How much longer until the desert, or they, finally claimed her? The engine revved, a predator's growl, and she knew, with a chilling finality, that time was running out. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the figure huddled in the scant shade of a rocky outcrop. Days had blurred into a haze of fear and flight since that last, terrifying encounter. May the name she'd adopted, as plain and anonymous as she could make it, had managed to lose them, for now, by scrambling into a labyrinth of canyons as dawn broke. But the respite was temporary, a fleeting illusion of safety in a world that had become a hunting ground. Her meager supply of water was gone, her lips cracked and bleeding. The scar on her face, a jagged line from her temple to her jaw, felt tight and inflamed, a brand marking her as prey. She was no drifter by choice. She was a fugitive from a life of gilded cages and venomous secrets, a life she had once believed was her own. The memories, sharp and cruel, threatened to overwhelm her. The sterile opulence of the McAllen estate, the cold ambition in her father's eyes, the discovery of the ledgers, the hushed, threatening conversations, and finally, the brutal confrontation that had left her scarred and running for her life. They called it family business, a euphemism for a web of corruption and illicit dealings that stretched further than she could have ever imagined, entangling politicians, judges, and enforcers, a shadow empire built on intimidation and greed. Her attempt to expose them had been met not with justice, but with an edict of silence, one she was meant to obey or die. Jace Riley had seen his share of hardship. Ranching in the unforgiving Nevada landscape was a testament to resilience, a daily battle against the elements and economic uncertainty. His ranch, Dust Haven, was aptly named a sprawling, often parched expanse of land that had been his family for 3 generations. It was his sanctuary, his responsibility. He was checking a far fence line, the one bordering the desolate stretch of government land where few ever ventured, when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a deer collapsed in the heat. Then, a flicker of tattered blue fabric. Caution warred with concern as he dismounted, his hand instinctively going to the worn wooden handle of the rifle scab to his saddle. He approached slowly, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. She was small, curled in on herself, her dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. A nasty scar, still an angry red, bisected one side of her face. She was dangerously dehydrated, her skin papery, her breathing shallow. When he gently touched her shoulder, her eyes snapped open, wide and terrified, a hunted animal's gaze. She flinched, trying to scramble away, a hoarse cry catching in her throat. "Easy now," Jay said, his voice low and calm, holding his hands up, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you. You need water. Help." Her eyes darted around, searching for escape, for threats. He saw the raw fear in them, the kind that went bone deep. He knew nothing about her, only that she was in desperate trouble. Every instinct honed by a life of self-reliance screamed at him to be wary, to not invite trouble onto his land. But the raw vulnerability in her bruised face, the sheer desperation in her eyes, overrode his caution. It was a look he'd seen in the eyes of a spooked Mustang, lost and terrified. "My ranch, it's not far," he offered, uncapping his canteen. "Got a well. Food. You can rest there." He held out the canteen. May stared at the water, then at him, a flicker of distrust warring with desperate need. He saw the moment her survival instinct won. Her hand, trembling, reached for the canteen. Jace watched her drink, slowly, carefully. Her story, whatever it was written in the lines of exhaustion and pain etched on her face. He didn't know what demons chased her, but he knew he couldn't leave her here to die. "Come on," he said gently, helping her to her feet. Her legs buckled, and he caught her, his arms surprisingly strong around her waist. "Let's get you out of this, son." As he half-carried, half-guided the strange, scarred woman towards Dust Haven, Jace Riley made a choice. He was offering shelter to a storm, he suspected, but it was a choice his conscience wouldn't let him unmake. The inciting incident wasn't just finding her. It was the moment he decided that her fight, whatever it was, had just found an unwilling, yet resolute ally. The first few days at Dust Haven were a blur for May. She drifted in and out of a restless, feverish sleep in the small, clean guest room Jace had provided. His housekeeper, a stoic, kind-faced woman named Elena, tended to her with quiet efficiency, bringing broth, water, and clean bandages for the gash on her arm that had become infected. Jace himself kept a respectful distance, leaving her to Elena's care. Though May was aware of his presence, the steady thud of his boots on the porch, the low murmur of his voice as he talked to his ranch hands, the scent of coffee and leather that seemed to cling to the very air of the ranch. As her strength slowly returned, so did the sharp edges of her fear. Every unexpected noise made her jump. The sight of a truck on the distant county road sent her heart hammering against her ribs. She offered Jace and Elena clipped, vague answers about her past, sticking to her persona as May, a woman with no connections and no destination. The fewer details they knew, she reasoned, the safer they would be. But the weight of her secrets and the burden of her assumed identity was exhausting. Jace, however, possessed a quiet patience that unnerved and comforted her in equal measure. He never pressed for information, but his observant gaze missed little. He saw the way she scanned the horizon constantly, the way she flinched from sudden movements, the haunted look that shadowed her eyes, even when she thought no one was watching. He saw the intelligence beneath the fear, the resilience etched alongside the scar. "You're safe here, May," he said one evening, finding her on the porch, staring out at the vast, star-dusted sky. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight of conviction that made her want to believe him. "Nowhere is safe," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Maybe," he conceded, leaning against a porch post. "But some places are safer than others. In Dust Haven, well, it looks after its own." The small community around the nearby town of Redemption was tight-knit, wary of outsiders. When Jace occasionally drove in for supplies, May stayed hidden at the ranch, terrified of being seen. But whispers traveled. A strange woman at the Riley Ranch, scarred, secretive. Jace deflected the curious questions with a laconic shrug, his reputation as a straight shooter providing a thin shield of protection for May. But her pursuers were not idle. One afternoon, a sleek black sedan, out of place on the dusty ranch roads, was spotted by one of Jace's hands near the southern perimeter of Dust Haven. They hadn't entered the property, just observed, then driven off. The news sent a fresh jolt of terror through May. They were sniffing around, closing in. That night, nightmares clawed at her. She woke up screaming, the image of her father's cold, furious face and the glint of steel in his enforcer's hand vivid in her mind. Jace was there in an instant, his presence a solid anchor in the terrifying darkness. He didn't say much, just sat with her until the trembling subsided, offering a glass of water, his quiet strength a silent reassurance. The incident with the black sedan, however, hardened Jace's resolve. He began to take more overt precautions. He had his hands, loyal men who had worked for his family for years, keep a more watchful eye on the ranch boundaries. He started carrying his sidearm more regularly. He even taught May, much to her initial reluctance, the basics of handling a rifle. Just in case, he'd said, his jaw set. "This ain't just your fight anymore if they come onto my land." The shared sense of encroaching danger, paradoxically, began to chip away at the walls May had built around herself. Jace's unwavering, unquestioning support was a balm to her fractured spirit. He treated her not as a victim or a burden, but as a person deserving of safety and respect. He saw past the scar, past the fear, to the woman beneath. One evening, as they shared a simple meal in the ranch house kitchen, the silence stretched, comfortable rather than strained. May found herself watching Jace, the way his calloused hands handled his fork, the crinkles around his eyes when he almost smiled, the quiet integrity that seemed to radiate from him. "Why are you doing this, Jace?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "You don't know me. I could bring a lot of trouble down on you." He met her gaze, his own clear and steady. "Maybe, but I reckon everyone deserves a chance to outrun their demons. And sometimes they need a bit of help to do it. Besides," he added, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "life out here gets a little too quiet sometimes." His simple answer, devoid of platitudes or expectations, resonated deep within her. He wasn't offering salvation, just sanctuary, a chance to breathe. But for May, who had known nothing but betrayal and fear for so long, it felt like everything. The stakes were undeniably rising. Her family's reach was long, their methods ruthless. The fragile peace of Dust Haven was under threat. And the most dangerous complication of all was the growing bond between her and the cowboy who had offered her shelter, a bond that made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated and made the thought of endangering him almost unbearable. Yet, it was also this bond that was slowly kindling a spark of defiance, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run forever. The approaching winter brought a chill to the Nevada air, mirroring the cold dread that had become May's constant companion. The near sighting of her family's operatives had been a stark reminder that her borrowed time was running out. She knew she couldn't stay at Dust Haven indefinitely, endangering Jace and his people. The thought of leaving the fragile security she'd found, of abandoning the quiet kindness Jace offered, was a physical ache. The turning point arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet conversation under a sky pregnant with snow. Jace found her in the barn, grooming his oldest mare, Juniper, her movements listless, her expression lost in shadow. He'd noticed her withdrawal, the deepening of the lines of worry around her eyes. "They won't stop looking for you, will they?" he stated, not asked, his voice gentle but firm as he leaned against the stall door. May's hands stilled on Juniper's coat. She didn't turn, but her shoulders sagged. "No," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "They won't. And you can't keep running forever," he continued. "It's no life." Silence descended, thick with unspoken fears. Finally, May turned, her face pale, the scar a stark relief against her skin. "I have to leave, Jace. Soon. Before they connect me to you, to this place. I won't be responsible for bringing that kind of darkness here." Jace pushed himself off the doorframe, taking a step closer. "And go where, May? Back to living on the edge, looking over your shoulder every second? That's not a solution. That's just a slower way of letting them win." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of frustration, fear, and a desperate, aching loneliness. "What else can I do? You don't understand who these people are, what they're capable of." "Then make me understand," he urged, his gaze intense, unwavering. "Trust me, May. I can't help you fight a shadow." It was the plea in his eyes, the genuine offer of partnership, that finally broke through her defenses. All the months of pent-up fear, the carefully guarded secrets, the crushing weight of her true identity came pouring out. "My name is not May," she began, her voice trembling. "It's Meredith. Meredith McCallan." She watched for any flicker of recognition, any change in his expression. The McCallan name was spoken in hushed, resentful tones in certain parts of the state, synonymous with unchecked power and rumored ruthlessness. Her family didn't just own businesses, they seemed to own everything, their influence a creeping vine that choked the life out of anything that stood in their way. Some whispered they owned half the state, their holdings vast, their connections impenetrable. Jace listened, his expression growing grim as she recounted the story, her insulated upbringing, the gradual, horrifying realization of her family's criminal empire, their fingers in everything from illegal mining operations that poisoned ancestral lands to political corruption that silenced dissent. She told him about her attempts to gather evidence, her naive belief that she could appeal to her father's conscience, the brutal awakening when he'd ordered her silenced permanently. The scar, she explained, was a message, a reminder from their chief enforcer of what happened to those who defied Marcus McCallan. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and exposed, Jace didn't speak for a long moment. He simply reached out and gently, tentatively, traced the line of her scar with his thumb, his touch surprisingly soft. "Meredith," he said, the name feeling foreign yet right on his lips. "That's a heavy burden for one person to carry." "I thought I could expose them," she said, a bitter laugh escaping her. "I was so stupid. They're too powerful. They control everything." "No one controls everything," Jace said, his voice resonating with a quiet certainty. "They just want you to think they do. It's how they keep people afraid." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "You've been reactive, Meredith. Running, hiding. It's time to be proactive. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying we fight back, Jace declared, a muscle working in his jaw. You have evidence, he said. Names, accounts, dealings. We find a way to use it. We find people they can't control, people who aren't afraid to stand up to them. The audacity of it, the sheer impossibility, made Meredith's head spin. Jace, you don't know what you're suggesting. They'll destroy you. They'll destroy this ranch. They'll destroy everything you care about. They're already trying to destroy you, he countered, his voice firm. And you're here, on my land, under my protection. That makes it my business, too. I won't stand by and let them hunt you down like an animal. And I won't let you run yourself into the ground. He took her hands, his grip strong and reassuring. You're not alone in this anymore, Meredith. We do this together. It was a monumental decision, a true point of no return. The idea of fighting back, of actively confronting the monolithic power of her family, was terrifying. But looking into Jace's steady, determined eyes, Meredith felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was there. The choice was made. She would stop running. She would stand, and with Jace by her side, she would fight. The drifter named May was fading. Meredith McCallan, armed with a terrible truth and an unexpected ally, was beginning to emerge. The game had changed. The decision to fight back infused Meredith with a new, albeit trepidatious, energy. The first step was to retrieve the bulk of her evidence. She had managed to smuggle out an encrypted flash drive containing copies of ledgers, incriminating emails, and recordings of her father discussing illegal land grabs and bribery. It was hidden in a safety deposit box in a small, out-of-the-way bank in a town several hours away, a contingency she'd set up before her escape. Jace insisted on going with her. The journey itself was fraught with tension. Every car that seemed to follow them for too long, every unfamiliar face in a roadside diner, sent prickles of anxiety down Meredith's spine. Jace, outwardly calm, remained vigilant, his hand never far from the pistol he now wore openly. They retrieved the drive without incident, but the relief was short-lived. As they drove back towards redemption, a tire on Jace's truck blew out on a deserted stretch of highway. Examining it, Jace found a small, almost invisible puncture, too clean for a random piece of road debris. Sabotage. Someone knew or suspected. Back at Dust Haven, they pored over the contents of the drive. The extent of the McCallan corruption was even more staggering than Meredith had fully grasped from her piecemeal discoveries. Illegal water rights diversions that were desiccating smaller farms, shell corporations laundering money, judges on their payroll, even ties to a human trafficking ring that exploited vulnerable migrant workers. It was a web of pure evil, masked by philanthropy and political influence. We need more than just this, Jace said, his face grim. This is explosive, but they'll have an army of lawyers to discredit it, to bury it. We need people they've hurt, people who are willing to speak out. Meredith thought of the families whose land had been stolen, the small business owners squeezed out by McCallan Enterprises, the whispers of fear she dismissed in her youth. Reaching out to them would be dangerous for everyone involved. Their first attempts to find allies were met with fear and suspicion. Many were too terrified of McCallan retribution to even speak with them. One rancher, whose water rights had been systematically stolen by McCallan's subsidiary, initially agreed to talk, only to back out a day later, his face bruised, his spirit broken by a thinly veiled threat. The McCallans were aware that Meredith was alive and, it seemed, no longer running blindly. Subtle but unmistakable messages began to arrive. Jace's prize bull was found mysteriously sick. A vital piece of farming equipment was vandalized. Then, more directly, a lawyer representing the McCallan family appeared at Dust Haven, offering Meredith a generous settlement and a one-way ticket out of the country in exchange for her silence and the return of any misappropriated family documents. Meredith, with Jace standing silently beside her, refused. The lawyer's smile was chilling. A regrettable decision, a mess. McCallan, your father is a forgiving man, but his patience is not infinite, nor is Mr. Riley's immunity to unfortunate accidents. The threat hung heavy in the air long after the lawyer departed. That night, Meredith was plunged into a dark night of the soul. The weight of what she was asking Jace to risk, what she was bringing down upon this peaceful ranch and the people who had shown her kindness, felt unbearable. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she should just disappear. She found Jace on the porch, staring into the darkness, a rifle leaning beside his chair. "I can't do this to you, Jace," she whispered, her voice choked with despair. "It's too much. I should have just kept running." He turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Running didn't work, Meredith. And this isn't just about you anymore. It's about them thinking they can bully and threaten their way to getting whatever they want. It's about what's right." He stood and faced her. "My great-grandfather built this ranch from nothing. He fought off speculators, drought, and depression. He didn't back down. I won't either." His conviction was a lifeline. But they needed more than just conviction. Their break came from an unexpected source. Elena, Jace's quiet housekeeper, had a cousin, Maria, who worked as a cleaner in one of the McCallan corporate offices in Reno. Maria had seen and overheard things, small pieces of a larger puzzle, and she hated the McCallans for what they'd done to her community. Fearful, but resolute, she agreed to help. Through Maria, they learned about a specific upcoming deal, a massive, illegal land transfer that would displace an entire community of smallholders, funneled through a series of shell companies and rubber-stamped by a compromised state official. The deal was set to be finalized in 2 weeks. This was their chance. They had a specific target, a timeline, and potentially a way to expose not just past crimes, but an ongoing one. Jace reached out to a few trusted figures in the wider community, a retired, well-respected judge known for his integrity, and a young, ambitious journalist from an independent news outlet in Carson City who had a reputation for fearless investigative work. He presented them with a carefully curated selection of Meredith's evidence, enough to pique their interest without revealing their full hand. The journalist, Sarah Chun, was initially skeptical but intrigued. The retired judge, Samuel Blackwood, listened with growing outrage. Together, they began to formulate a plan, gather irrefutable proof of the impending illegal land deal, corroborate it with Meredith's historical evidence, and then, with Judge Blackwood leveraging his old contacts and Sarah Chun ready to break the story nationally, create a firestorm the McCallans couldn't easily extinguish. The final days leading up to the planned exposure were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, coded messages, and heightened vigilance. Maria risked her job and potentially her safety, smuggling out documents related to the land deal. Jason Meredith, with Sarah's help, worked to connect the dots, building an airtight case. The air at Dust Haven was thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of danger. They knew the McCallans would not hesitate to use brutal force if they discovered the plan. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every unfamiliar vehicle a potential enemy. The stakes had never been higher. They were no longer just fighting for Meredith's freedom, but for a sliver of justice against a seemingly invincible foe. The climax was set to unfold at a discreet, high-stakes meeting where the final papers for the illegal land transfer were to be signed. Maria had provided the details. A secluded lodge owned by a McCallan associate, nestled deep in the pine-covered mountains overlooking Lake Tahoe. Marcus McCallan himself wouldn't be there, but his most trusted lieutenant, Arthur Kendrick, the same man who had personally delivered the blow that Scar Meredith would be, along with the compromised state official and representatives of the shell companies. Sarah Chun, equipped with hidden cameras and recording devices, managed to get herself hired as temporary catering staff for the event through a contact. Judge Blackwood, using his considerable influence, had arranged for a small, trusted team from the State Investigation Bureau officers he knew were beyond McCallan's reach to be on standby, ready to move and once the incriminating transaction was documented. Jace and Meredith were stationed nearby, in a rented cabin, connected to Sarah via a discreet comm line, their hearts pounding in unison. For Meredith, the thought of Kendrick being so close, the architect of so much of her pain, was almost paralyzing. Jace's hand on her shoulder, firm and steady, kept her grounded. The tension in their small cabin was a living thing. Sarah's whispered updates painted a vivid picture. The arrival of the key players, the casual arrogance of Kendrick, the nervous sweat on the state official's brow. They're reviewing the documents now, Sarah breathed into the comm. Signatures are next. Suddenly, Sarah's voice hitched. Problem. Kendrick's got extra security. They're sweeping the room. I think they found one of my bugs. A wave of cold dread washed over Meredith. Get out, Sarah. Get out now. Static crackled, then Sarah's strained voice. Too late. They're locking down. Before Jace or Meredith could react, the comm line went dead. Damn it. Jace slammed his fist on the table. They know something's up. He looked at Meredith, his eyes blazing. We can't leave her in there. Their carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Without the final proof of the signing, the waiting officers couldn't act decisively. Kendrick would destroy the evidence, and Sarah would be at his mercy. Meredith's mind raced. Kendrick, he was the key. He was arrogant, overconfident, and he had a particular disdain for her. I have to go in, Meredith said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the tremor in her hands. What? No, Meredith, that's insane. Jace grabbed her arm. He knows me, Jace. He'll be focused on me. It might create enough of a distraction, enough chaos for Sarah to get the evidence out, or for Judge Blackwood's team to have a reason to intervene. It was a wild, desperate gamble. Before Jace could argue further, she was out the door, running towards the lodge, her past and future converging in this single, desperate act. She burst into the main room of the lodge, finding it in controlled chaos. Kendrick was barking orders, his men roughly handling Sarah, who looked terrified but defiant. The state official was cowering in a corner. Looking for me, Arthur? Meredith called out, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't feel. Kendrick spun around, his face a mask of cold fury when he saw her. Meredith McCallan, you always did have a flair for the dramatic. And poor judgment. My judgment seems to be improving, Meredith retorted, her eyes darting around, looking for any sign of Sarah's equipment. Yours, on the other hand, bringing your dirty laundry out in the open like this is a private meeting, Kendrick snarled, taking a menacing step towards her. One you weren't invited to. I heard you were giving away land, Meredith said, forcing a taunting smile. Thought I'd see if any of it was mine. You know, the part my father stole before he tried to have me killed. Her words, sharp and accusatory, hung in the air. Kendrick's eyes narrowed. He signaled to one of his men. Get her. As the man advanced, Meredith stood her ground. This was it, the final confrontation. Just as Kendrick's man reached for her, the main doors of the lodge burst open. Judge Blackwood strode in, flanked by uniformed state investigators. Arthur Kendrick, Judge Blackwood's voice boomed. You and your associates are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and bribery. Kendrick looked stunned, then enraged. You have no proof. "Oh, I think we do," Saracen said, stepping forward from where she'd been held. She held up a small, miraculously intact digital recorder. Every word, every signature. During Meredith's diversion, Sarah had managed to activate a backup device and slide it to one of Blackwood's undercover men who had infiltrated as lodge security. Kendrick lunged, not for the officers, but for Meredith, his face contorted with rage. "You worthless girl." Jace, who had followed Meredith against her wishes, fearing exactly this, tackled Kendrick from the side, a blur of motion. The two men crashed to the floor. Investigators swarmed in, subduing Kendrick and his men. It was over. The central question whether the McCallans' reign of corruption could be broken had been answered with a resounding yes. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The evidence Sarah Chun and Meredith provided, coupled with the damning recordings from the lodge and the testimony of the now cooperating state official, was irrefutable. Arthur Kendrick's arrest was just the beginning. The investigation rapidly climbed the ladder, reaching into the heart of the McCallan empire. Marcus McCallan, Meredith's father, was arrested within days, his face a mixture of disbelief and cold fury on the evening news. The illusion of his invincibility shattered. The legal battles were protracted and ugly, but the weight of evidence was too great. Properties were seized, assets frozen, and a network of corrupt officials and associates was dismantled. The McCallan name, once a symbol of untouchable power, became synonymous with disgrace. Meredith, though she had to testify, largely stayed out of the public eye, allowing Judge Blackwood and Sarah Chen's relentless reporting to carry the fight forward. For Meredith, the true healing began back at Dust Haven. The immediate threat was gone, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Jace was her constant, his quiet strength a bedrock. They talked for hours, Meredith slowly unpacking years of trauma, Jace listening, understanding, never judging. With the legal resolution of her father's empire, a significant portion of the McCallan assets, land, and wealth that had been acquired through decades of illicit dealings was placed into a trust, overseen by a board that included Judge Blackwood. Meredith, as the one who had risked everything to expose the corruption, found herself with an unexpected inheritance. Not just money, but vast tracts of land across the state indeed. It seemed the whispers of her family owning nearly half of it weren't wild exaggerations, though much of it was tainted. She didn't want the money for herself. Together, Meredith and Jace decided what to do with it. They expanded Dust Haven, not just its physical boundaries, but its purpose. They used the reclaimed McCallan land and resources to create a foundation, a sanctuary for others who had been broken by power, and greed, a refuge for whistleblowers who needed protection, for families displaced by corporate exploitation, for anyone needing a fresh start. They called it the Phoenix Project, a place for rising from the ashes. Dust Haven Ranch, once a solitary outpost, became a hub of quiet activity and healing. Cabins were built, gardens planted, and a small schoolhouse established. People came, tentative at first, then with growing hope, drawn by the story of the scarred woman and the cowboy who had stood against an empire. Meredith found a new purpose, not as an heiress, but as a guardian. The scar on her face no longer felt like a brand of shame, but a mark of survival, of battles fought and won. She and Jace, their bond forged in fear and tempered in courage, built a life together on the land they loved, a life defined not by wealth or power, but by trust, community, and the unwavering belief that even in the dustiest of havens, hope could take root and flourish. Their new normal was one of shared responsibility, quiet joys, and the enduring strength found in helping others rebuild their own shattered lives. The drifter had found her home, not just in a place, but in a purpose and in the heart of the cowboy who had seen past her scars to the incredible strength within.